What's up, grinders? So in today's video we're going to be reviewing how I learnt Norwegian on my own. This video has been recommended to me so many times on this channel, and the only reason I haven't reviewed it so far is because the first time I opened it I saw it was 23 minutes long and I was like, by God, when I add my comments this is going to be one long video. So I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get around to it, but it keeps getting recommended, so I guess I'm gonna have to actually do a review. Now obviously this video is very well known. I've seen clips of this video via another YouTuber who did an interview with this girl. Anyway, let's begin.
It's way too much to explain, you guys. It's way too much to say. I wrote this video so many times, I thought about it so many times, but it's so much to say. It's so difficult to organize it. I don't know if this is good. Okay, let's calm down and start from the beginning. Hei, jeg heter Ilys, jeg bodde mesteparten av livet I Frankrike og 23 år gammel. Mange av dere spør meg hvorfor jeg valgte norsk. Men jeg valgte ikke språket først. Siden jeg kom på besøk til Norge for første gang, har jeg alltid følt meg bra her. Og jeg likte språket. Jeg elsket å høre på andre snakke norsk. Jeg kjente I hele kroppen at både Norge som et samfunn og språket fikk meg til å føle meg bra, til å føle meg hjemme. Jeg begynte derfor å lære meg norsk, til og med før jeg hadde egentlig bestemt meg for å flytte hit. Jeg flyttet til Trondheim et par år senere, I 2020. Det var viktig for meg å kunne snakke norsk før jeg flyttet. Jeg ville forstå kulturen, forstå samfunnet, og få tilgang til den norske måten å tenke på. Jeg ønsket også å få norske venner uten å snakke engelsk. Jeg ville bli en del av Norge.
It's clear as day why this girl got fluent in Norwegian, and it comes down to that core driving passion. So at the end of the day, all these methods we talk about, the majority of them are effective in different ways, and you can pick more optimized methods or less optimized methods, but if you have a passion for learning this language or becoming part of this language, as she says right here, then you're going to get there in the end, because it's just going to drive you through whatever problem you have. And I often talk about grinding on this channel because we will have days where we're all sitting here and we're going, I just want to take a day off. I want to rest today. But when that mentality sets in and it starts taking over, before you know it, you've rested for a week or whatever. But if you have that core driving motivation, that you pretty much don't need the grind, because you're just going to be pushed forward anyway. And this reminds me so much of my own story, but I'm going to let her finish hers.
Og at Norge skulle bli en del av meg. I dag har jeg kommet ganske langt med dette, og jeg ønsker å dele alle tipsene jeg har med dere. I decided to make this video in English because I thought it would be easier for the people that haven't started learning Norwegian yet, and also I thought that you could use these tips even if you're learning another language.
Haven't started learning Norwegian yet?
I really hope that this video is going to help you. So when people hear me speak Norwegian, ask me how long I've been living here, and I say that I've been living here for 3 years, they just tell me how is it possible? And they tell me about their experience with languages, and they say, for example, that they had Spanish or French at school for 5 years and that they can't even introduce themselves in that language. And they're like, I'm so bad, you're just so good. But I too had Spanish at school, and I too can't make a sentence in Spanish. The reason why I've been able to get so good is because of the motivation I had. The difference between learning Spanish at school and learning Norwegian on your own because you want to move to Norway is that you don't have the same motivation. I know that it's a bit cliche, but it's really important. It's been really important in my journey as well, because when I started learning Norwegian, my goal was to speak Norwegian like a native Norwegian. So I knew that I wasn't going to be perfect right now, but in the long term, I didn't want to just be able to understand people. I didn't want to just be able to make myself understood. This wasn't my goal. Really keeping in mind what your goal is really helps with the motivation.
Yeah, so she's 100% on point here. Motivation, the passion, the thing that drives you forward, that's really important. But also having a crazy goal at the end can help you as well. I have a crazy goal for Chinese, and I've never mentioned it on this channel. Maybe I'll mention it right now. Don't laugh at me in the comment section. So basically, my crazy goal is one day, maybe a year from now, I'm going to start a second YouTube channel, which will be completely in Chinese, and I'm going to do Let's Plays. Because I love video games, I make video games for a living, and I just want to play video games, but I can't justify doing it in English, but in Chinese. It's part of my learning. So I'm going to do a Let's Play channel where I'm going to basically play all the popular games purely in Chinese, and online multiplayer games. I want to get into all the PvP stuff, maybe even become one of the best bloody Chinese Let's Players out there, and just do that. That's my crazy goal.
So my goal was to make Norwegian like another mother tongue for me. And I thought, how do kids learn languages? Because I know that I'm an adult now, but I could try to learn this language as if it was my mother tongue. And then maybe it will help me understand this language better. And also I saw kids that were moving to Norway and that learned really fast because they don't think. They just learn, they hear people, they repeat, they just try to like make it their own. And I was really inspired by that. So I thought, okay, when you're a kid, what you do first, like for the 2 first years of your life, is listen. You listen all the time to people. And you don't speak, you're just like this, and you're listening all the time.
Okay, I have to disagree with that statement. Yes, for the first year, you're basically just listening. However, as soon as a kid can form even the most basic sounds, they start trying to actually use them and make them. And what happens, and this is something that's not mentioned a lot in the comprehensible input community, is that kids don't just sit there passively listening. They try to talk as much as possible, as fast as possible. And even when they can't talk, they use gestures, whatever they can to communicate. And that communication and the feedback that they get helps them to massively improve their language. So yeah, passive listening for a short period, I think it has some benefits, but I don't think it's all what it's blown up to be. So yeah, start listening, but as soon as you've got the sound system down pat and you can start forming your own sounds, start actually, building templates.
So what I thought was, okay, what I'm going to do first is that I'm going to listen to Norwegian as much as possible. So what I did is that I found some podcasts, I found some random things. I didn't understand anything anyway. So I was just like listening to things. I didn't care what the theme was. And I was just listening all the time. Or not all the time, but every time I could, I was doing it. So when I was, for example, like...
I think you have to be a pretty special person to be able to pull that off. If I was just listening to Chinese for 2 years, just listening to the language, I don't think I would be able to handle it. It would just drive me insane and I'd then want to learn it. But I have to be honest as well. I have married, my wife who's Chinese, and I have inadvertently heard their conversations for years before I started learning Chinese myself. So maybe it's completely true that just listening for a period of time does help. And I'm just not aware of that period of time I was listening. However, my instinct and logic dictates to me that just listening for a very long period of time, although it will help, it's an inefficient use of your time.
Cleaning my room, when I was playing a game on my computer that didn't require a lot of focus, before going to bed, I would listen to Norwegian. I'm a really, I was, and I still am, a nerd. Okay, so I'm gonna give a lot of advice, but I'm just explaining how I learned, and you don't have to do everything, but it's to give you ideas. And then I thought, kids don't do grammar exercises. They just don't. When I learned French,
yeah, she's 100% on point with that.
I didn't do, when I was 2 years old, grammar exercises with like sentences to fill in. No, I didn't do that. What I did was hearing, for example, the same book over and over again. And sometimes my mom, she tells me, like, when you were a kid, you knew one book by heart. You just like turned the pages, you knew exactly.
Okay, let's go. In the comments section, everyone, what is that one thing you watched to death that drove your parents up the wall? For me, this is going to sound so strange, I don't know why, I just loved the movie Bowfinger when I was a kid. And I watched it over and over and over. And at that stage, we had VHS shops and we had to go rent it out. The guy, when I went there to like rent it out, because my dad had like a membership there, the guy didn't even put it back on the shelf. He just had it sitting to the side and he'd just give it to me when I came back. Type of thing. So like I watched that movie so many times and it's not even that good of a movie. Like I don't know why, but what was that one movie for you guys? Later on for me it then became Starship Troopers.
Exactly when the pages had to be turned and you just turned it. And I thought, okay, this is how we learn when we're a kid. We read the same book over and over again and then we take the expressions of the books and we make it our own. So I thought, okay, what I'm gonna do is find some scenes, for example, in a movie or some messages that they send each other, in Scum. I watch Scum like so much. It's a TV series that's Norwegian, and in Scum they send each other.
Okay, next one. What's your favorite TV series in your target language that you like to rewatch over and over? For me, it is The Expanse on Amazon Prime dubbed to Chinese. I know it's not actually Chinese, like it's not a Chinese original, but it's dubbed really well, and I just love sci-fi.
A lot of messages, and some of them are pretty long, and I thought, okay, that's perfect. I'm gonna take a message that I like and I'm gonna write it down, and then I'm gonna just like try to understand the words, which words.
Us poor non-Latin target language users. This obviously is not something you're going to be able to do from day one with Chinese or Japanese. Like, you got to learn the scripts.
Word mean what, and then I'm going to read it a lot of times. So what I did is that I used Google Translate. You can like make Google Translate read you things. Of course, it's a bit robotic.
Kjære Isak, nå...
Find a proper text-to-speech engine. Like, Google Translate's okay, but like, there is way better options.
Sitter jeg der vi traff hverandre for første gang, og jeg tenker på deg.
It's really like a robot, but it does pronounce the words in the right way. And of course,
I'm not sure about that. I know for Chinese, for example, it doesn't. Like, it often messes up tones. So you don't use Google Translate for like listening to Chinese audio.
what did help me is that I knew some people in Norway, so I could ask to record, for example, a message for me and to send me a vocal so that I could hear the
Yeah, of course, native like content will always be better.
Melody of the language and try to like reproduce it when I was reading it. So this helped me a lot, but I think that you can find this on internet as well. On Instagram, I gave you a tip of a podcast, and then you get like an email with a text and you have a podcast. So the person that wrote the text reads it for you as well. So you could use this method with this podcast.
Does anyone have any good recommendations for like Chinese podcasts? Like, I know about Da Shu, but like I really need to find a good podcast in Chinese that will keep my interest, preferably something about gaming or tech.
For example, okay, Ilys, nobody understood anything of this explanation, but just go check this video on my Instagram. I explain it way better, I swear.
I think I got what she was saying there. She's basically just saying, get a podcast, get the text that comes with it, you know, read the text as the podcast is being spoken, you know, just review it like that.
What I found doing this is that I was learning everything I need to learn about the language in one text. So if I was reading a lot of times, for example, like 5 sentences, and I was learning grammar, vocabulary, conjugation, pronunciation, I was learning all of this in one exercise in a way.
And you're also learning it all in context, which is the important thing.
At the same time as doing this, I thought I also want to learn like some easy words to start a sentence or to like build a sentence. So I made a list of all the words that I thought were useful. I couldn't find now the list that I had made, but I remember that I had some words like alone, together, some basic verbs, and a lot of these words that you use all the time. And then every time I would see a sentence with these words in it, I would be like, oh yes, that's my word. I would take the sentence and write it on another piece of paper, and then I had like all these sentences with all the words that I wanted to learn in it, and then it helps me remember vocabulary and be able to use the vocabulary that I learned.
So that's kind of similar to what I do. So when, for example, I will watch a video in Chinese, say a Let's Play, and then if there's a word that's really common in that video, it's like being used 5 or 6 times, I will then take that word out, plus all the sentences it appeared within, and then I'll add those to Anki as audio cards to listen to that word over and over in a native context.
A lot of questions on Instagram about how to remember vocabulary, how to learn new words, how to like know how to use the vocabulary that you learn. And this is my answer. Try to see it in context, and when you want to learn a word, try to find a sentence in a movie or in a book or something like this with your word. Then write the sentence on another piece of paper, and then try to read the sentence, like, for example, once a day. Once a day, like 10 minutes before you go to bed, for example, instead of being on your phone.
So she's basically applied a manual version of the SRS algorithm. So first she sees it the first time in context, she writes it down in a book, and then she reviews it before bed. Obviously that's going to refresh your memory of it, and then I'm assuming she might say in a moment that she reviews it later in the week as well. So you're basically doing a manual version of Anki right now.
You take the list of all the sentences that you think are interesting to learn, and you read them out loud. And you try to remember how the accent goes. I had a lot of videos on Instagram about pronunciation in Norwegian. You can try to like remember all of this and read it out loud. I'd like to show you how I took notes for me to remember the pronunciation of words. So for example, I would write on top of the real word, like how I would have written it since it was pronounced that way. And also I could write like some arrows or some waves under the words.
So what I would do specifically for Chinese is I'd learn the word's pronunciation as a complete word, not like individual characters, but as a complete word. And then I would learn it as a unit, like, or a chunk, as some people call it, and then practice that chunk over and over. Because even with Chinese, what will happen is the tones won't change, but they will shift slightly. Well, some tones will change, but like that will shift slightly based on the flow of the actual chunk itself. So for example, we could say, 对我来说, which means according to me, but altogether it would be 对我来说. So that there actually has kind of a certain melody that goes with it, which is different to like if you just individually said each one of those sounds, 对我来说. So it doesn't sound as natural as 对我来说. So it's got a different melody to it.
To remember where the emphasis was put on the word. The more you read one sentence again and again, the more it's going to become like automatic for your brain to build a sentence that way. And then when you're going to have...
She's talking about templates, something I harp on a lot about. So basically you take an actual sentence that you find interesting with a structure that you want to reuse in your real life, and then you swap out a component, for example, the noun, and then you can just have a bunch of different nouns going in, and you can practice this one structure over and over. And why do I always talk about this? The reason is because if you practice a template as opposed to try and think about grammar, when you encounter in real life, when you want to use this, what will happen is you'll start saying the start of this sentence, and it's almost like your brain does this pathfinding algorithm to all the templates that it knows, and it will start following. You'll go with your first word and then your second word, and then it'll be like, oh, okay, I'm following this path, and then it'll just start rolling out all the things that it expects will fill out the sentence, and then it's going to inject your new thoughts into it, which might be, you know, the noun or stuff like that, and then once you get to the end, it's going to like roll out how that would normally finish. And the only downside of this in the early stages is that you will say things and you won't be confident that you said them right until someone tells you that you said them right. And if someone says, you know, that sounded like a bit strange, then you know you can just build a new template based on whatever they tell you, which is actually an issue with like a heavy grammar approach. So a basic grammar approach is good, like, you know, learn the basics of grammar. But you've all been in those situations. You've made a sentence with perfect grammar, you've spoken it, and someone who's a native's gone, yeah, it just sounds weird. And you're like, yeah, but what's wrong with it? And they'll be like, I can't put my finger on it. There's like nothing wrong with it. We just don't say that. You've all heard, we just don't say that. And it's basically that there's customary ways to say pretty much everything in the language. Even if something could be said another way, most people don't say it that way. And the benefit of following a template-based system where you use real sentences and you basically practice these sentences while swapping out components is you know that for the vast majority of your practice, you're using real sentences.
Have to build a similar sentence in another context, your brain will think automatically, oh, this structure, I know it because I've read it so much that it's a bit like automatic for me. So maybe you will be able to replace the words in the original sentence by other words in the context that you're in now, and
exactly
make a sentence without having to think like, oh yeah, this grammar rule, I remember it was like this, and then you just get stuck.
Exactly, that's another issue with like a heavy grammar approach. And additionally, often with grammar approaches, you'll be hit with a bunch of rules that could all be applied, and you're like, which one do I choose? What way do I go here? And you'll get stuck. But if you then use a template approach, whatever templates you first learned, your brain's probably going to follow those ones. So you don't have to think, oh, which one am I going to use? What should be applied? What needs to now not be applied because of these exceptions? Your brain's just following a path in your head via your neurons going, well, we normally go this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, as opposed to go to position A and go, well, now what do I apply? Position B, now what do I apply?
With all your grammar rules and you don't really know which one to use, instead of being stuck with grammar, you can learn grammar without knowing that you learn it. And that's what I did.
Yeah, so for example, for the vast majority of my Esperanto speaking life, I didn't actually know the grammar of the language. I just kind of learnt it as I went. And now I'm at a stage where I know all the grammar of Esperanto and I can clearly clarify why certain things are being applied.
I wanted to learn for Norwegian to become a language that was automatic for me. That was going to be a part of me, really. So I'm not saying that it is wrong to do grammar exercises. I'm just saying, like, in this video I'm explaining how I learned it based on my goals. And for me, doing grammar exercises wasn't interesting. My goal was for Norwegian to become a part of me. And I wanted to understand Norwegian. I wanted to learn Norwegian like I would as a kid. About this anti-grammar rules speech, I just want to say that I did need some rules to learn Norwegian. The thing is that I learned the rules later in my learning process, and I think honestly that it could have saved me time to learn them before, because it takes a long time to know.
I think she's making a bad assumption there. She probably did it the right way the first time. So you learn a little bit of grammar at the start, just so you know where your feet placement should be. Then you learn a bunch of templates, and as you start seeing patterns, you're going to recognize grammar. And if you don't recognize it, you're still seeing patterns. You can then go look up the grammar and confirm what you've already seen. So you don't really need to dive into grammar that much. Now, a good time to dive into grammar is when you're actually very good at the language, because when you get really good at the language, then you want to get creative. You want to break out of the box of, well, I'm just following the templates of other people at this stage. Now I want to get creative and, see how I can bend the language. And that's where knowing the grammar rules can come into play, because you can do things which are correct but unexpected and with intention. So grammar's good at the beginning, and I guess also good at the end. And then while you're learning, it's good to confirm what you're doing.
things because it's become automatic for you and to figure things out on your own, which is what I did, and I liked to do that, but I don't think that it's necessarily the best way to do it, and I did need some rules. And when I started teaching Norwegian, I did buy some books, some grammar books with rules in it, and honestly it helped me take my Norwegian to the next level. So I'm not against.
I'm curious to know, when she taught Norwegian, well, when she teaches Norwegian, does she actually teach the way that she did it, or is she now teaching based on what other teachers tell her to teach? So is she actually following a more traditional method, or is she following the method that she used? If she teaches the method that she actually uses, then I think that's good.
Grammar at all. I personally don't like to do grammar exercises, but I'm not saying that knowing the rules is a bad thing. It is actually a really good thing.
Well, when it comes to teaching, knowing the rules is good because you're always going to get questions and then you can explain why it's that way.
What I also did to help me do that, learn new words and new conjugation in a context, is writing my own stories, writing my own text. Because sometimes I didn't really find a text that I really liked, and also sometimes I just wanted to learn something that was a bit more personal. So what I did is that I would describe what I did during the day, for example, or what I wanted to do tomorrow. And in the very beginning, you don't know how to make a sentence. So you're like, I want to say this and this and this, but I don't know how to say it. I don't have anyone that can help me. Use Google Translate. I know that, like, at least for me at school, we saw Google Translate like the devil.
Okay, obviously this is an older video. Nowadays you got ChatGPT, but you could try the best of both worlds if you don't have a native available and go ChatGPT, then Google, and do a comparison between the two and see where it differs.
It was always like, no, don't use Google Translate. But Google Translate is actually...
There's also, I forget the name of the website, but I'll put it in the subtitle down here. This website is great for looking up actual sentences. You can use it to go look up, say, a specific verb that you want to know how to use, and you'll get hundreds of examples of it, at least if it's a big language.
If you give it context. So if you just write a word, maybe Google Translate is going to give you like a word that has nothing to do with the word you're looking for. But if you write a whole sentence with a good context and a sentence that's correct in the language that you're writing it in, Google Translate will most of the time translate it right.
I think that's more true for languages that are closer to English. When you get to languages like Chinese, Google Translate can mess up really badly sometimes.
What I did was write 5 sentences about my day, for example, and then put it in Google Translate, see what it was giving me, writing the Norwegian version of my day, and then do exactly the same. Try to read it out loud a lot of times. Make Google Translate read it for me.
I dag følte jeg meg litt trist fordi det har regnet mye I det siste. Jeg håper at jeg føler meg bedre I morgen.
So I did that more and more, and as I was doing it, I realized that it was easier and easier for me to make my own sentences. So of course I was making a lot of mistakes when I was writing a sentence, but I felt like, okay, now I know a bit how to make a sentence in Norwegian. Now I have an idea of what it should sound like.
So yeah, obviously, as you produce, you get feedback, you improve, and it's exactly what a kid does. As soon as they can speak, they start trying to speak and they get feedback and they improve. So it's always a crucial step within the language learning journey.
What I was doing, for example, is instead of writing my day in English in Google Translate, I would write it first in Norwegian, then I was writing it in English in Google Translate and comparing my version and the right.
I'm not a big journaling person, so I don't enjoy doing this. But what I do like to do, and there's actually Language Lords, he made a video on this, is where I will make a mock vlog in the language. And I'll just speak until I freeze up and I'm like, I don't know the words or the structures here. And then I'll go research how to say that, and then I'll practice again over, and then I'll get more stuck and I'll look up things and I'll put it all in Anki, and the next day I'll try to talk about the same topic again. So it's a very good way of like practicing if you just don't want to journal. But I also don't do a journal writing, especially for Chinese, because, well, I can't write Chinese. It's not a skill that I'm learning, and it's probably not a skill I'm ever going to learn. I'll learn how to read and write in like on a keyboard, but never by hand.
Version. I was lucky enough to be able to come to Norway sometimes, and then I would buy books. So my relationship to books and to read.
I love how she says, and then I would buy books. Like, I get that feeling. I totally understand. She's like, oh, this is so exciting.
In Norwegian is a bit weird. I have never wanted to read children books, which is weird if you think about the fact that I wanted to learn like a kid, but I still was an adult and I wanted to learn as a kid with adult books. So what I was doing is buying books that were way too difficult.
Well, that's not weird. You just want to be interested in what you're
for
reading.
Me. I didn't understand anything, honestly, when I started reading these books, but I liked it. I was like, I need to do as if I had no choice, as if there was no one to teach me and I had to figure it out on my own. So what I did was taking a book with me everywhere. So I would just open the book, like, for example, this book I read a bit later when I understood Norwegian, but I would open the book like in the middle of the book, and then I would try to see if there were some words that I knew, if there were some like sentences that I could understand. And I loved doing this. I was just going through the pages. Norwegian was a bit tight.
So she's taking a really big task, breaking it down into a small part by taking out a segment of the book and focusing on that. What I do, and what I love doing in Chinese, is I play World of Warcraft. And in World of Warcraft, you have things that are called quests, where are basically these little missions you got to do, and you get a little bit of text. It's usually like 2 paragraphs. So I love that because I'll run up and I'll talk to a little NPC in the game, and I'll ask him, give me a quest, and then he'll give me this little paragraph, okay, 2 paragraphs or whatever. And then I can sit there for half an hour breaking down everything he's saying, looking up the words, learning the structures, making my cards and everything, putting it into Anki, and then go off and do the quest itself. So I'm having some fun, I'm playing a game, and I'm also actually practicing using the language. And the great thing about a game, especially like World of Warcraft where they give you quests, is that each quest usually has a chain, and it's related one to the next to the next. So once you go to the next quest, half the stuff you studied in the previous one now actually becomes relevant in the current one. So you've got kind of like that +1 that the comprehensible input always talks about happening here, where you're like starting to pick up more and more, and the more you move down the chain, by the end of it you probably can read the whole thing. And then of course you'll go start a new quest, which will start from like a clean slate, but at the same time it's also lots of fun.
Chinese still for me, but I wanted to be lost in the language. Try to just take the language as it was and not try to control everything. And I thought, like, this book is my goal. My goal is to be able to read this book. Let's start now. And when
my goal is to get into a guild in World of Warcraft, a Chinese-speaking guild, and just have fun playing the game with Chinese speakers.
Was a sentence that I could understand, or when there were like many words that I understood, I was so happy, and like I felt so proud, and I got so much motivation because I was like, this is a book that normal Norwegian people read, and I can already understand a bit of that book. And this was like the best feeling for me. Another thing that I did really often was to read a book and at the same time listen to the audiobook, because when you read, even if you read in your head, your brain still needs to know how to pronounce the words to go like further, and that's why it takes so long to read in a new language. So I feel like having the audiobook and a person that
audiobooks for people like Chinese speakers and Japanese speakers, it's something you have to get to a little bit later because you need a massive amount of like characters to be able to do this. But I hope to one day get to this stage where I can listen to full audiobooks and also follow the text.
just reads the book to you at the same time as you follow is really good. Sometimes I would just listen to one chapter first, just listen, and then I could work on like my listening skills. I would try to understand as much as possible, and then I would take the book and follow the text in the book at the same time as I was listening to the podcast.
You could easily do this also with just videos on YouTube, so you could just read the subtitles and listen to the thing and just do it over a few times. And it's basically the same thing, it's just here she's using audiobooks.
And of course, I was also using series and movies to learn. And really, I was doing exactly the same as everything I explained to you in this video. I was watching, for example, an episode of a
Again, drop your favorite series down in the comment section below in your target
series,
language.
and then I would watch it again and copy some sentences that I thought were useful. I would change the subtitles. Sometimes, like the first time I would watch it without subtitles to see what I understood. Then the second time I would watch it with Norwegian subtitles to see if I understood a bit more. Then the third time I would watch it with English subtitles. And
something else you could probably do is watch it in English as well before you do all this.
Rewatch it again, for example, with Norwegian subtitles. Now I'm speaking of like a scene, not a whole episode or a whole movie, obviously, but like a short scene that lasts 2 to 5 minutes. You just watch it a couple of times with different subtitles. So I did that a lot, and of course, when there was a sentence that I thought was useful, then I just copied it in my notebook. And if I just wanted to like have something to read, something a bit easier than a book, I could just go through all the sentences that I had written, and then I knew already what they meant. It was a bit more motivating.
So yeah, basically natural SRS algorithm happening right here. She's going back and looking through these sentences.
And I could still read them out loud, and I could still learn a lot of vocabulary from them. Then I had like vocabulary lists like this, and what I did was write stories with them. Again, I was lucky to know someone that was Norwegian, but what I did was write my stories in English, and then I would send my stories to people that I knew. They would translate it in Norwegian and then send it back to me. When I got my story back, now you know what I did. I read it a lot of times, and I also got like a vocal. Then I would listen to the vocal like a lot of times. Then I would like read it until I knew it.
This is where you're making like content that's relevant to your actual life.
Do it by heart. So I would spend 1 to 2 weeks on it. Let me know if you want me to share them with you. Actually, it could be nice for you because I wrote a lot of really long stories full of vocabulary, of expressions, of conjugation that I wanted to learn. I could make videos about that. Let me know if you want me to make videos about that. And what I did as well to work on the writing is listen to the vocal without reading it and try to write all the words that I heard. Then I could work on my comprehension, and I could also work on the writing and on the spelling of words.
Like, there is nothing to add to that. That is a really good method. I totally recommend it.
I think that we think of learning things by heart as like a bad thing, but honestly, these stories, learning them by heart and reading them a lot of times, what it helped me with was remembering vocabulary, understanding grammar, learning conjugation, working on my accent. And when I could say a whole story like this by heart, I could speak without taking breaks. My brain knew how to make a sentence, knew how to pronounce words without taking breaks in between. And this is why I think that it's so nice to learn sentences by heart, is because...
Another thing is, it doesn't have to be just stories, it could be scenarios. So for example, I've learned in Chinese how to talk about Esperanto because if I ever mention it to a Chinese speaker and they ask me what it is, then I want to be able to explain to them in detail what it is. So I basically learned like a speech or various versions of the sentences needed to form a speech about what this language is. So learning things by heart is totally not a bad idea. In fact, at the start, you should be trying to do that. And the more you learn, you're going to forget all of these things though. However, the underlying concepts and words and structures that built those speeches will remain, just the speech itself will fade away.
When you like try, for example, to speak to yourself or when you try to speak to someone else, it's really good, you have to do it. But problem with it is that you're always looking for your words. You're never like saying a whole sentence without taking a break, or this will take a long time for you to do. And then you never learn, you never teach your brain to pronounce words, to work on the accent in a long sentence, because you don't know how to make a long sentence. And I think that, or I don't think, I'm sure that the fact that I did all this, it helped me for two things that like impress people a lot when I speak Norwegian, is that I speak really fast without needing to take breaks, and I have a really good accent and pronunciation. And this is because...
Yeah, that's going to happen when you practice templates a lot. Like, if you saw the intro to my previous video where I spoke Chinese, I just like started fast with Chinese. I made one mistake in there, but like overall it was fast, it was like clean, very understandable. I got a couple of comments of people saying that was really good type of thing. And it's nothing like a massive amount, but I already speak at a level where people assume I'm fluent when I'm actually not, because the things that I have practiced and I have done, I've gotten really good at.
Of my stories. Like 100% because of my stories. I totally forgot to mention it earlier, but of course, speaking to yourself is really important because all of this that I just said now, there wasn't any speaking part where you can just say what you want to say out loud. And I did that since like the beginning or maybe like a month.
You don't just have to speak to yourself, you can also just speak to your cat or whatever you got. Like my poor cat, he must understand at this stage Esperanto, Chinese, English, Englandese. Like this cat is probably the most polyglot cat on the face of the planet because I'm always directing him in Chinese and in Esperanto to do things.
After having I started talking to myself. I do that a lot anyway. I really like love to speak, and when I'm alone, I also like to speak.
Det är vanskelig å snakke om det på norsk, fordi jeg kan ikke si alt jeg vil, men jeg ville prøve å si det på norsk, og snakke om hva jeg tenker på.
And what I was doing when I was talking to myself was trying to imagine that I was the best at speaking Norwegian. And this helped me a lot with my confidence, at least when I was alone. It helped me a lot to dare working on my accent without feeling like I was stupid.
That's really interesting. Like, I don't have a confidence issue, but I guess for those people who, you know, they don't feel confident, they should pretend or they should act out in an area where they feel safe, that they are a confident native speaker and just try. But for me, it's like I will just practice, and I can be overly confident. That's a big problem for me, where I will walk into a situation, I'll start something I know I can't finish, like conversation-wise. And then I'll be halfway through and I'm like, why did I do that? But it helps me because I have to get really creative then after a while. But yeah, like if you're like not a confident person, maybe pretending to be a confident person will help. You know, the old saying, you know, fake it until you make it.
You know what I mean? Like when you learn a new language and you try to like force a bit on the accent in the beginning because you don't really understand how to balance the pronunciation, then you feel a bit stupid when you're alone and you just speak. But try to like think in your head, okay, I'm the best. I'm the one that speaks Norwegian the best. It's not like for you to think this, but it's for you like just in the moment to
I imagine her standing in front of the mirror, just standing there going, you're the goddamn best at Norwegian in the world. No one else can compete. Look at you. You are a living goddess.
There doing the accent as you think it should be, and for it to be a bit easier to speak to yourself. Speaking to yourself can be so much. You can like tell yourself about your day. You can try to speak about a movie that you saw, about a book that you want to read. You can try to speak about so many things actually. And if you don't have inspiration, you can just take a picture and try to describe the picture, try to imagine what the people are doing. I try to do this a lot with my students. I just take a picture or a drawing with a lot happening, and then I just ask them to pick one character to describe them physically first, to learn vocabulary about like how they're dressed and their hair and all of this, and then we try to imagine why this person is here. I'm trying to be like, okay, maybe this person is running because he's late to go catch a train because
Yeah, this is a great method. Just practice like describing everything around you. I do it all the time. I literally sit in this chair and I just describe the current state of my room, which usually ends with me saying it's really messy.
he actually is leaving with his lover that he hasn't seen in 2 months, and like all of a sudden you have a lot of things to say and you can learn a lot of new words by describing a picture and putting a bit of imagination in there. With languages, as long as you work, you will get better. And even if you don't see the progress right now, even if you've been working for 2 weeks and you feel like you're exactly at the same point as 2 weeks ago, first, it's not true. You're improving even if you don't see the result right now. And second, maybe in a week you will see like suddenly, oh, now I can feel it that I've become better. So knowing that you can't always see the results right now, this is completely normal. But if you keep doing what you do, if you keep working, if you keep trying to find out what is the best method for you, you will get better.
So what she's basically saying here is you just need to keep grinding every day, doing something in the language. You know, it doesn't matter the method, the idea. If you get bored with something, do something different. Like, don't feel like you have to follow some set path that's been laid out for you. So overall, this video has been 100% on point. I can see why it blew up on YouTube. It's a really good video. She has a very likable personality. I agree with like 95% of what she said there. My only gripe, I guess, is like sitting there for 2 years just listening. Like, I feel like that's very inefficient, but at the same time, it worked for her. So if that's something you want to do, all for it. Now, if you guys have got any other videos you want me to review, just leave them in the comments below and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, well then for the next 2 years, you're going to be listening to me whisper into your ear as you're locked in a dark dungeon below the deep earth.